If you're not already profiting off your podcast, you're doing it wrong. Just kidding. Actually, not really. Podcasting takes a lot of time and energy. I should know. I have one. And it's a phenomenal tool to help you expand your business and your movement. So why would you not want to create a profitable podcast? In this episode, you'll be joining me and Jamie Atkinson for a jam-packed conversation that provides a ton, and I mean a ton, of valuable tips to help you create profit with your podcast. In this episode, you'll learn Jamie's 4 podcast identity pillars to help you design a podcast concept that multiplies your business, 3 main ways to monetize your podcast, and the importance and impact of having a Dream 100 list. Jamie has been traveling the world full-time since 2017 and has spent the last 2 years building and failing at different businesses. Jamie realized, though, as he was doing this, nobody was talking about the failures, the challenges, the struggle. And he thought to himself, am I alone? No, the problem was nobody was talking about the real stories of entrepreneurship. That's when Jamie knew he needed to make a difference. He's now on a mission to build his $1 million business completely from scratch by helping entrepreneurs everywhere create and launch their own movement through his Entrepreneur Junkie movement. Now, if you dig this podcast, stay in the loop by signing up for my weekly emails. Sign up today at rubyfremon.com/subscribe. Whether you're new to this podcast or you're a loyal thought leader, please make sure you take a moment to download a few episodes and drop a rating and review on iTunes. Now, it is time to design a profitable podcast with Jamie Atkinson. Welcome to today's Thought Leader, where I'm challenging you to rise up, speak up, and create a movement. I'm your host, Ruby Fremon, and I'm here as a catalyst for you, the new generation of thought leaders. Join me every week as I dive into raw and real conversations that will help you amplify your presence, influence, and impact. Hey, thought leaders, I am back with another very special guest, and you are in for a treat. If you have been waiting to get your podcast out there, or if you've just started your podcast, or if you have been sitting on this idea of a podcast, then you're going to want to tune in to this entire episode and probably have a notepad ready. So without further ado, I am excited to welcome Jamie Atkinson to the show. Jamie, welcome to today's Thought Leader. I am so stoked to dive into this conversation with you.
Hey, Ruby, I can't wait as well. I think today's going to be very meta. We're going to be talking on a podcast about podcasting, and I think it's going to be really, really interesting. So I'm super excited.
It will be. It will be. We're talking about podcasts on a real-time podcast, and I think the best part of this is we're talking about profiting off of podcasts. And you know, what we've seen in the last couple of years at least has been this increase in the amount of podcasts that are coming out. Like, I don't know what the stats are. I'm not sure if you know what the stats are, but it feels like there's a new podcast coming out every day. And it also feels like there's a podcast dying every day.
Yeah, I mean, podcast deaths are real. Like we have a little joke inside of our community of like you have to look out for the podcast funerals that happen all the time because the saddest thing in the world, and it's really interesting, Ruby, because podcasts are growing like crazy. Like it's one of the fastest growing social media kind of outlets out there. People are coming into it. People are seeing the value. There's big conglomerates that are buying into podcasting. Spotify is making huge moves into the space, spending millions and millions of dollars. And people are really starting to see. But what's really interesting is that 90% of Americans still listen to their AM and FM radios, which is just nuts. And that's up from, okay, so over the last
AM, FM still exists?
AM, FM, right? In the car, like listening to like the football, like all of that is still going on. And the growth in that has been so slow. It went from like 97% to 90% in like the last 10 years, whereas like everything else is moving so much faster. So all of this growth that's happening in podcasting, as technology advances, as cars get internet, and as all of these things start to happen, it's going to become way, way, way more popular. So coming in now, even though it feels like it's moving fast and there's a ton of energy, we're still right at the beginning of this, which is what excites me the most about it. Because like, there's more blog posts made every single day than have ever been podcasts, which is
that
crazy.
And that boggles my mind, because I mean, I used to write blog posts and then I stopped.
Me too.
Because I have a podcast. I also used to listen to the radio, and I'm going to age myself here. I also used to record my mixtapes off of the radio.
Oh, damn. Yeah. I was all about, yeah, that's awkward. I better leave. I'm sorry. Yeah. I thought this was a 90s show. I'm so sorry. Yes. But no, like that's what it's at though, right? Like everybody loves to listen to, what is most convenient. And as podcasting is becoming more mainstream, it's becoming way more convenient. But here's the problem. A lot of people start podcasts, and I generally see it two ways. You have the people who have a ton of money, and you have the huge companies like Gimlet and people like that who are buying up a lot of podcasting spaces. They run, shows like Startup and things like that, and they have a ton of money, right? And then there's entrepreneurs who have a lot of money and pay a podcast agency, and it's very well produced, and it's very high up. And then there are people right at the beginning who are the entrepreneurs who are just getting started. And sometimes those entrepreneurs, they don't have a ton of money to invest in podcasting. So one of two things tend to happen. They either start and just kind of figure it out themselves, and they tend to get going. But a lot of people 3 or 4 months in, if they're finding that it's taking a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money to do it, and then they don't see any reward, then a lot of people go, screw this, I'm going to do something else because I'm going to get more money out of it. Like I'd rather spend my time writing emails because I can see the direct ROI. But the crazy thing is, Ruby, and you'll know this for doing your podcast for the time that you've done it, the real benefits of podcasting start to come in, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years down the line. Once you build up that credibility, you build up that trust, and you build that renown for yourself. And it's that authority that you build in the space. But for most entrepreneurs, they just can't get to that level because, the average, and this is crazy, John Lee Dumas says that the average podcaster does 7 episodes before quitting. 7.
Holy shit. I think I recorded 7 episodes, and that's what I launched with. I think I actually launched with 10.
And that's what happens. People do that. They record like 7, they do a launch, they do it for like 8 weeks, and then they're like, screw this is too much work, because they're doing all of the editing. They're doing all of the all of the stuff that goes into it.
They don't realize that, well, number one, there's work involved. And number 2, like there's a real dedication, a real commitment involved to a podcast. It's not just something that you're like, hey, I'm just going to do this for fun and add it into my business. And it's like, no, it's not going to sit there and churn itself. Like you actually have to record the episodes. You have to find your guests. You have to book your guests. And then there's the whole gamut of trying to make it profitable, finding sponsors, doing whatever it is to make it actually become a working gear in your business. So it's not just this thing that you have that's supplementary, that's quote unquote just for fun, but it's not really fun because it's a lot of work and it's not turning anything, but it's actually something that is supporting you in your business.
Exactly. And that's the key thing, right? The fun part of it, because a lot of people really want to do a podcast and they really love the idea. And I like how conversational they can be and things like that. And what's really cool is that when we came into this space, we looked at all of these problems. We looked at the fact that people couldn't, make money straight away. People had to wait 12 months. And the reason people have to wait 12 months, by the way, is just because that's how long it can take to build up a good audience. I mean, if you already have an audience and you can funnel them to the podcast, it's easy, but most people don't. Maybe they have 500 or 1,000 people on a podcast, but not enough to really create this kind of huge impact straight away. So instead of having to wait 12 months, we said, okay, well, how about if we could come into the space and we could come at it from a sales mindset for businesses that, sell to businesses, B2B businesses, and we could help them figure out, okay, I can start a podcast, but I can also make money from it straight away. And then by that they're able to, well, one, if you enjoy a podcast anyway, I can tell you, you're going to enjoy it a lot more when you are making money from it at the same time. But also by fueling that podcast growth with the profit, you can do things like put out more content, which fuels the growth. You can start to put paid ads to the podcast to still, keep it going out there. You can, pay for teams to handle all the stuff that you don't want to do. Because I'm the first person to be like, I could do the editing, but I freaking hate it. Like,
I have never edited a single episode, nor will I ever edit a single fucking episode ever. So to my editors who are probably listening to this, thank you very much for the work.
Yeah, they're gonna put a soundbite in now that's like, pay us more, Ruby. Like. But so that's really important. So what we managed to do, and I come from a background of sales, and I've been an entrepreneur. And honestly, Ruby, like I told you before we came on this interview, like I failed hard, like for the whole year and a half before we got here in like 7 different businesses. But now that we found this one that allows me to work with the people that I really want to work with, I'm now working with entrepreneurs. That's where my passion is. And, I'm able to really enjoy it. Every day I'm showing up with people and helping them with their podcast.
Right.
It's fun. Like, it doesn't feel like work. So, now that we're able to help people understand that that is actually possible, like the whole game is changing, and people now are flooding into the podcast space because, if you can find a way to make it profitable and you can create content long-term, well, that's like a no-brainer, right?
Right. And it's like such an amazing way to connect with your audience. For me, YouTube and podcasting have been phenomenal for me, not in terms of like downloads and views, but in terms of like creating loyalty. The people who actually listen to my podcast or watch my YouTube videos will go from a listener or viewer straight into my highest offer, like one-on-one coaching. They'll skip all the group. They'll skip anything. Right. They're like, because they're like, it feels like you've been in my room. It feels like I've been like talking to you for months, or I had someone watching my videos for a year
while you're working out at the gym.
Yeah. And so it's this degree of intimacy that social media doesn't necessarily provide. And for me, that's been such an amazing tool, is just to be able to connect with my audience in this way and really create a sense of loyalty.
And you can be yourself. Like,
yes.
You can be who you want to be. You can be vulnerable. Like, I talk to people, like I think of my microphone as my personal diary. Like, honestly, like I'm more honest to my audience than I am to my own self sometimes when I'm in front of that microphone. But that's great because it just attracts more people to you. Yeah. So
the microphone is like that. What is it? The truth telling serum.
Yes. Yeah. In your neck. It's like, bad news, guys. Things haven't been going good, but I'm optimistic, like all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited today because I talked before with you on the show, Ruby, and you kind of said to me, look, Jamie, like I want to give something tactical to my users, something that they can walk away from the episode. Because, I see so many episodes, Ruby, and we talked about this before, where it's like, oh, well, it sounds great. And you just talk about how great that person is. But like, can the audience actually do like what they just talked about?
And this is what I pride this podcast on. So audience, listeners, thought leaders, yes, I do this with every single guest. I make sure you're coming to the show, you have something to deliver, and you're not just going to send them to a link to get all the good stuff. And Jamie has actually done the extra due diligence of coming super fucking prepared. And he's got some really, really amazing content for you that you can implement immediately and start to profit on your podcast, right? That's what's happening.
No pressure, right?
Jamie, it's on like Donkey Kong. Let's help our listeners make some money off their podcasts.
Awesome. So the first thing that I want to just preface with this is that what I'm going to talk about as the main way that we make money is going to be specific to businesses, B2B, right? and what you want to realize is that if that isn't you, there is still going to be something towards the end of this episode, which I'm going to share, where you'll still be able to make money. So if you do sell B2C, if you're selling to, women with like a health product or you're selling a relationship product, that there is still going to be a way that this can work. So stick with me here and we're still going to have something for everybody, but I'm going to focus first. Yeah. Stick around. Like don't leave me just yet. Anywhere. Yeah, exactly. I promise there's more to come. And but I'm going to focus specifically on B2B because I think that's where the most profit is in for most people. And I think also that's where a lot of our audience is sometimes. They're selling to other businesses and things like that. So whatever type of podcast you have, whether you're selling to businesses, whether it's a comedy podcast, whatever it is, the biggest thing that I noticed that helps with creating success is having a really great podcast identity. And when we talk about podcast identity, it's not just about who we're talking to, and it's not just about what we talk about. It's actually a lot of different factors, and the identity is so important and crucial, because if you set it up correctly, every single piece of your podcast, from the cover artwork to the intro to the trailer episodes to your show description and what you talk about in the episodes themselves, they'll all be saying the same thing to the same person, with the same promise of where they're going to go, with the same reason to why people should be listening to you. And if you get this right, and this is one of the first things that I put people through in my program, and I've had people come out on the back end after all of the good stuff that we go through say, you know what, Jamie, that clarity on understanding exactly who I'm talking to on my podcast and what my identity is was probably the most valuable thing.
Yeah,
and it can
clarity
really
is power.
And it helps you to get super clear as well on your business. And you have to really think about, well, who am I really talking to? So we've created something called the PIP, which is kind of super ironic because we're in Korea right now and we have a dog in the house called Pip who absolutely inspired the name behind it. But it's called the Podcast Identity Pillars. There's 4 of them overall. And these identity pillars are super crucial. So I'm going to break them down for you individually one by one. And if you're making notes at home, my advice to you right now is not necessarily to start thinking about this right away. Maybe just make notes of it, maybe jot down some ideas, but really deep dive into this over a couple of days. Most of my students, it takes them 2 or 3 days, rewriting it a couple times to really get it nailed perfectly. So these 4 pillars, there's, did I say there was 4? Yeah, there's 4 in total.
Yes, so there was 4. Mm-hmm.
4 times 4. And the first one, which is super important, and probably I would say the second most important pillar, is the first one, which is the who. Who is going to be your audience? Who is the person that you're trying to attract to your show? Now, with any business, it's always really important to figure out who is that ideal person.
Definitely.
But when we're looking at the who, I want you to think about 3 different things. Your business and your podcast should be perfectly aligned if you want to make money from the show. If you have a back-end business, this is going to work very well for you. And what you should think about is, a lot of people say to themselves, okay, well, I sell to this person in my business. I'm creating a podcast around my business, but I'm going to talk to someone completely different. And they're going to, right? And like, what's the point? Like, the whole purpose of your podcast is to build up your following, but really it's to make sure that you're attracting people to your business who you can actually sell a product to, because those are going to be the people that come in there, right? So your audience, your guests, and your customers should all be the same type of person. And what I say to a lot of people is, just bear in mind that they might be the same type of person, but just on a different scale of how far along they are. So your guest, for example, on a scale of 0 to 10 might be a 7 or an 8 in terms of how successful and far along they are. If they're, say, for you, Ruby, it's a thought leader, right? You might have someone who's on that higher end of the scale.
Right.
Whereas your audience might be at a 1 or a 2. They might be just starting, but still the same type of person, just on a different level of their journey. Right. And same thing with your customers. They might be like a 5 or 4 or a 5, somewhere in the middle. So when you're attracting your perfect audience, make sure all of those are aligned. If you have a particular type of person in your business, let's say you sell to agency owners, make sure your podcast is for agency owners. If you sell to chiropractors, make sure your podcast is for chiropractors. I see a lot of agency owners who sell to chiropractors who make a Facebook ad podcast to entrepreneurs. Like, and
wait, what?
Yeah, for real. And maybe they think, all right, well, I'm going to long-term build up a brand and sell to those entrepreneurs on how to build a Facebook course. But like, there's a freaking million of those out there, and they're dying fast. So make sure it's
creating that alignment.
Exactly. And once you have that, and once you have that very clear, and you say to yourself, you know what, I'm going to be my podcast is going to be for stay-at-home moms who are in their 30s, who are starting their own business online. Let's say it's that demographic. The next thing you want to think about is, well, where are you going to take that person? What result are you going to get them to? So pillar one was who, which is the audience. Pillar two is where are you going to take them? And we're talking about the result that you can give those people.
Right.
When I talk about result, a lot of people get this confused. They start to think about, well, I'm selling a course that teaches them how to make their first $100, or I'm going to teach them how to, stay at home with the kids and still manage to get some work done without pulling their hair out, or whatever it might be. And we don't want to talk about the steps. We want to talk about the very top level result. So this is where they're going to go to as that long-term aspiration. So for Gary Vee, his top level result is to buy the jets, right? But that's going to be a long-term journey that he's spending his whole life moving towards. And, for me, I want to help people create mass movements, and I want to, empower people to create these amazing companies that build huge followings so that they can grow and kind of exceed themselves. So when you're thinking about what your where is and where you're going to take people and what your result is going to be, try and get it as like a top level. So for you, Ruby, it's like, empowering people to become thought leaders, right, in their own space.
Yeah, for me, it's like I speak to and work with thought leaders, people who are aspiring thought leaders, and what I'm doing is I'm helping them rise up, speak up, and create a movement. That's everything that I do, everything that I put out, whether it's videos, whether it's podcasts, whether it's social media content, whether it's my programs and my offers, it's always that. And I keep it really aligned. And I know what you mean with the misalignment, because I've seen that happen too, where people are like, oh, I'm just going to create this podcast and, oh, this is just for fun. Or they end up talking about stuff that I'm going to talk about being on plant-based diet, but my clientele is Facebook ads. And okay, there's a lack of...
Right. There's just a lack of clarity, right? And that's what I love about your show, Ruby, is that you have an identity and it's very clear. And whether you knew about these or not, you've done this, right? So you've got it very, very clear. But laying it out for people as to, this is what you need to do just makes it super tactical. Like oh, wow, like you can go and do this. And in 3 or 4 days time, you'll have a super clear idea of exactly how you want to position your podcast. Right. So think about that top level result. Think about like where you want to take people and figure out, okay, this is where I want to be gradually getting people to. And, what you want to think of is, well, if someone listens to my show for 6 months or a year, where are they going to be progressing towards? What is the end goal for most people? What is that top level result?
Right.
And once you get that clear, so now you know who you're talking to, you know how you want to help them and what you want to get them to achieving. The next step is to think about, well, what the hell are you actually going to talk about? And so we're talking about the theme of the show. When and the what, this is the most important pillar, because a lot of people get this completely wrong. And what's important isn't necessarily what you're talking about, but the reason it's important is about positioning. So let me give you an example. So I was speaking to somebody on the phone yesterday, and she's an amazing woman. She runs a health product. She does juicing, and she helps women entrepreneurs create happiness for themselves, right? And she helps business women who are in their 40s and 50s. They're getting to that age where their bodies start to change. It kind of sounds like puberty, right? Like and the biggest thing about that is that things start to change and they don't know why. And they really start to struggle. Like their weight starts to increase. They start to feel like a lot of unhappiness and these different things. And this is super real. Like there's a lot of women out there that she's helping. And when we talked about that, immediately she said, okay, my podcast is going to be about helping women get healthy and create this kind of this mindset of like wealth and happiness and abundance and all of this stuff around health. And what was interesting is that she thought, okay, I'm going to create this podcast about juicing. And that was going to be the theme because that was her back end business. But then I said to her, okay, so, and I'm going to give a little bit more of a secret here as to how we monetize. There's 2 ways that you can monetize your show. You can either monetize your audience or you can monetize your guests.
Okay.
We help people do it is we help them monetize their guests. Right. And that's something you can do kind of straight away. So that's a little teaser. And the reason I tell you that is that, for this lady, she was going to be monetizing her guests. So they were come on interviews. She was going to talk to them with the view to building a relationship. And then after the interview, getting back on a call to sell them whatever it is that she wanted to sell them. And for her, it was selling a high-end product. It was going to be a $1,000 coaching product or something along the lines of that. So I said to her, okay, so you're going to talk about healthiness and you're going to talk about juicing and you're going to talk about all of these things on the show, but you also want to sell to people that are coming on as guests for the show. So let me ask you this. Is somebody who is healthy who comes on your show to talk about juicing, are they going to want to buy your product around healthiness and juicing?
Right.
And she, no. I said, okay, so what could you talk to people about that's going to attract your perfect target customer?
Mm-hmm.
And so we started to talk about it. She said, well, actually, if you boil it down, it's really about happiness. And I speak to women entrepreneurs who have great businesses. So we figured out instead, okay, what we're actually going to do is we're not going to create a health podcast. We're actually going to create a podcast around business and women. And it's going to be a show that your perfect target customer is going to want to come on, and it's going to want to talk about what they really love and what they're excited about. And what's going to happen then is more of your perfect customers are going to come. And it's all about, and then the show is about focusing on amazing female entrepreneurs, but with a talking about happiness as the goal, as opposed to wealth, and that's what makes that show kind of unique and different. So very, very different to what she originally thought about before we got on the call. And that positioning for the way that we monetize the guest is super, super important. And the good thing about this is that a lot of people think, well, Jamie, I have a long-term vision of creating a health business. Like, that's what I want to be telling people about. And I want to talk about that in my show. And the thing is, you can still talk about that in the show. But if you position it around that top level, okay, this isn't just about health. This is about happiness for her. Or, if it's business, this isn't just about Facebook ads. This is about creating a long-term wealth solution for you. It's not just about, speaking to entrepreneurs. It's about, creating thought leaders and helping to excel. If you think about that kind of top level result, it's very, very different. So get very, very clear on that, what you're going to talk about. And what you want to think about is, if I'm going to be trying to attract my perfect target customer to be a guest, and I want someone that hasn't already done what I'm selling, whatever it is you're selling, you want someone that needs that, right? You need someone who needs that service that you're going to give them, whatever that may be. So think about that perfect target customer who hasn't yet achieved your solution or needs your solution. How can you attract them to your show?
Right. And that's such an interesting concept, because we don't hear about that. Like, I've never heard of this before. Ever. And I'm sure that our listeners haven't. I think I created it, Ruby.
There'll be others done it though, but it's really a different way to think about it, because it's now about like, okay, well, what's cool about this? Well, one, you don't have to bug your audience. You don't have to sell to your audience. You don't have to overwhelm them with like, go to this link and here's my sponsor and like download this thing. Like, we listen to a ton of great podcasts and they annoy the crap out of us because they have these stupid adverts that pay them like pennies on the dollar. Like, it's just ridiculous. We have
to forward 15 second. It's like, how many times do I have to press this button?
Absolutely kills you, like, mentally. And I see amazing podcasts that have grown huge followings that start to really piss off their loyal fan base, because like they're giving like 3-star reviews. Like, used to love this podcast and now I'm sick of it because of all these damn reviews. I'm looking at you, Skinny Confidential. So, there's stuff like that happens that really starts to annoy you when you get to that higher level. So we want to really focus on helping people to monetize from their guests. And you want to do it in like a very thoughtful way as well. It's not like hardball. You're actually building relationships. And what's cool about this as well, Ruby, is that you start to understand more about your perfect target customer all the time, because you're finding out about their stories.
Well, you're also talking to them all the time.
Yeah. And my favorite thing about this is you can pre-vet people before you even pitch them. Like, you already know whether they're going to be a good fit to work with you because you've interviewed them. So if you're a lunatic and you don't want to work with them, don't pitch them. Like, you don't even need to talk to them about it, which is the really cool thing about it as well. So those are the 3 pillars. And then the final pillar. So we've had who, which is your audience. We've had what, which is what you're going to talk about on the show, the theme. We've had where, which is like the result that you want to give people. And then the final podcast identity pillar. Yeah. You feeling me with this pillar? So the final one is we want to talk about why. Like, why the hell should people even listen to you?
Right.
And when we talk about that, most people go, I don't know, I'm just starting. I don't know what makes me unique. So, and the thing you want to say here is you want something that makes your show unique, but you don't have to be unique about this. And what I say this is like, you don't have to come up with the just amazing idea that no one else has ever thought about. I mean, you just need to go out and look at what other people are doing for different types of podcasts. Find out what you love about them, and then do a version of that on your own show. You know,
I would love to share like my personal story with the why is when I started my podcast. So the first 2 years of my business, I've been in business now 5 years. In the first 2 years, I spent a lot of my time being on other people's podcasts. So being featured in interviews, being featured on podcasts. And what I absolutely hated was that so many of them would go through a series of questions. So there was no flow and there was no room for flow. And they all asked, or the majority of them asked, what's your story? Or what was your breakdown to breakthrough? What was your pain to power? And it's like, you know, I feel like I've talked about this on about like a dozen other podcasts, and it's on my website, rubyfremont.com/mystory. I'd love to talk about right. And I'd love to talk about something different. And so it always felt so mechanical and so repetitive. And so I vowed to myself, like, I want to create a podcast where it feels conversational, where the audience feels like they're part of the conversation. They're in the room with us. They're a fly on the wall. And I want them to walk away with tangible things that they can implement immediately to create shifts in their life and in their businesses and in their leadership. And so this is why I'm so adamant with every single one of my guests. You have to offer them something on the podcast. You can't just invite them to come into your Facebook group and say, that's where all the secrets are going to be shared. And you have to be a good conversationalist, because if you cannot hold a conversation with me, then I'm not going to book you.
Audience, like Ruby's a badass. Like, you know, I spoke to her before, and she was like, tell me why you're going to be good for the show. And like, I felt like I was on Shark Tank. I was like, well, Mr. Fantastic or whatever, wonderful, like Mrs. Wonderful, here's what I got for you. And like, I shared everything, and she's like, wow, I love that story, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some value. Like,
I did say that.
which is super funny, but I'm glad I shared it with you anyway. And you know, but that's cool, right? Because we've already had a conversation. We've already got that kind of flow and banter going. So it's none of that. Yeah. Exactly. So it makes a big difference. So that why is super important, Ruby, for you, right? Like, your show is different to everybody else's for that exact reason. Like, why the hell should people listen? Because it's not the same boring fluff that everybody else does, right? Yes. So you have to think about like, well, what is going to make your show unique? On my show, we talk about failure. We really dig in, and I'll ask people who are super successful, I don't care about your successes. I want to dig into like the challenges you had to overcome and how that failure hurt you and what it made you feel like and how you were able to get through that and like how hard it was. Because for me, I see so many entrepreneurs who think that no one else fails and they think it's just them, and they put that pressure on themselves. Well, no, we all fail. Like that's what it means to be an entrepreneur. Like it's about that resilience and pushing through. So I do a lot of that on my show because I want to make sure people really understand they're not alone, you know, and that's where we're trying to position it. So,
and the link to his show is going to be in the show notes. FYI, the link to Jamie's show will be in the show notes.
Hashtag Entrepreneur Junkie Movement. Hashtag plug. Just kidding.
Hashtag go listen now.
Yeah. Don't listen to this. There's no more value here. Just head over there. It's way better. No,
I can still boot you off. So the why is super important, and it's really interesting because I think that's the piece that you said something earlier about. It doesn't have to be like a completely unique idea. It just has to be unique. And I think that's where people get caught up. It's like, I need to reinvent the wheel and create something so different. And that's where they get stuck, and then they don't create it. And it's like, no, you don't have to complete. I mean, one of my guests on a very early episode, he shared the example of a hotel. There's like 1,000,001 different hotel chains. No one's really reinventing the wheel, but each hotel chain is known for something different. And it's not necessarily different from the other, but they're known for something different. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So it's like creating something like that.
And you think about it, like they're unique in their own town, or they're unique in their own space. So, you know, if somebody's doing something on a health podcast that you adore and love, but you're a wealth podcast, or even if you're a make money podcast and you love another make money podcast, if your audience is different to their audience, then you can do something that's similar. You know, that's not a problem. So that's a really, really important thing to think about. And those are the pips. That's the podcast identity pillars, and super important. So a lot of people say to me like, oh, Jamie, that's so obvious. Like everyone knows that. But the truth is, like, most people don't really know their identity very well. And what I encourage everyone to do is like have those written out in front of you. And intentionally, every time you record an episode, be aware of it. Think about, who am I talking to? What am I going to talk about? Where am I going to take these people with this content? And why am I different? Why should people listen to me? And once you get that visualized, you're creating all of your content around that one kind of theme, and it becomes very consistent. And that's what people truly love, is consistency.
Yes. Yeah. People love to know what to expect. People love to know, like, if I need to learn about this, I'm going to go here.
Now we need to talk about the good stuff, right? Making the moolah,
making the money, making it rain. I wish I had like money flying.
One of those money guns, like that, like fires out, like for me $1 bills, but for rich people $100 bills, like, flying out,
or like just that, like Monopoly money, where I'm just like throwing it at the screen. Yeah, listeners, you can't see what I'm doing, but viewers, you can. Yeah. I'm making it rain.
Go check out YouTube. That's where you guys want to be, right? Like that's it. So yeah, so when we talk about monetizing, I kind of touched on it a minute ago, but
yes,
there are really three main ways that you can monetize an audience. I know I said there was two main ways, but I'm going back on that slightly. And the way that that I'll monetize with my guests and with my students and my clients as well, is we focus on two main ways. The first way, and both of them, by the way, are using the guests and not the audience. But the first way is to sell to the guests specifically. And the second way is to build partnerships with your guests. So those are the two main ways that we'll monetize. The third way you can monetize is to monetize through your audience. But you need a lot of traffic. So you need a lot of people listening. And then you have to physically break down people's beliefs. So you have to figure out, well, what are the false beliefs that people have? What are the things that are stopping them, the excuses, the reasons that they wouldn't buy something? How do I overcome those beliefs in the content through stories? And then you have to have call to actions, which send them to, your product or a webinar or whatever it might be. But doing that throughout the content, sometimes can feel a little bit salesy. So you have to space it out. So for it to be effective, you really need to have enough traffic. And typically, if people aren't getting at least 1,000 downloads an episode, they're never going to make a significant amount of money through monetizing their podcast that way. And when I talk about significant, we're talking about, over $2,000 or $3,000 a month, which is enough for most people for it really to be life-changing, or for them to be able to focus on it as a full-time thing. So the two ways, so I'm not going to talk about that third way much on this episode, but I have gone into it in greater detail on my show if people want to go out and find out more info. But for the two ways that I would suggest, and the real one way that's the fastest way to the cash, and what's cool about this, like I just had a bunch of students last week, and we had 9 podcasts launch 2 weeks ago. And one of the guys that launched the show, he closed a $6,000 deal. He created 2 JV deals, which are going to bring him in at least 5 figures. Amazing. And he just closed yesterday morning. He closed a $25,000 deal, all after launching the show, right? So the show's not even been out a month, and he's got 1,500 downloads. He's a top 100 podcast. He's like, he's crushing it. He's got like 80, 90 reviews on the podcast. And he's also closed, what was that, like 26K worth of business, and another 12K that's coming like in the next couple of weeks. That's insane for a brand new podcast. Like, and people don't realize like how possible this is to do. Preface, like, he is an agency, so he sells funnel building for entrepreneurs, in the online space. Hasn't got a lot of previous experience, hasn't got a ton of customers, hasn't made a ton of money in the past, but just by speaking to people in the space was able to have success. So if you want some of that stuff, like, that's what we're going to share right now. So let me break it down. So the number one way is to monetize guests. And a lot of people say to me, well, Jamie, what does that actually look like? What does that actually mean? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to be really intentional with the guests that you come on your show. And, and we won't really talk about it on today's episode, Ruby, unless we have time, but what I make sure that people do when they launch the podcast is they want to launch it with ferocity, and they want to launch it with a spectacle. You want to, launch with a lot of episodes, usually 8 episodes to launch and create that energy around the show, so people start to binge your content. Right. And you want to launch and try and get into the chart positions. You want to get into new and noteworthy. You want to get into the top 200. You want to get into the top 100. And the reason you want to do that is when you have that notoriety, super easy to get anybody you want on the podcast. Like, hey, man, like, want to come on my top 100 rated podcast? And they're like, hell yeah, that sounds great. Like, it's like gives you that bestseller status like you have on Amazon, for example. So when you launch the show, try and launch it very, very well. And again, we've got more content about that on the podcast. But for people that, once you've done that, when you're trying to get your guests onto your show, what you want to be doing is you want to be really intentional. The way that I do this is that we go and we look for 25 people. We say, okay, who are the 5 people who are going to be really hard to reach, the really successful people, but who are still a good fit for the product that I'm selling.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I look at people who have amazing online followings, very, very successful people doing over $1 million who don't maybe have a podcast or have a podcast, but they probably aren't monetizing it based on what I've known. So you pick 5 people and those are the hard to reach people. Then you go for 20 people who are more achievable. Those are people who you think, okay, I'm going to be able to get those people, but those are going to be people who are going to be open, but they're still going to be a good fit for your product.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for me and my business, it's really easy to tell if they have a podcast or not, because you just search and find out. For your business, it might be slightly different depending on what you do if you're listening at home. You have to really think about, how can I identify whether they need what I'm hustling and what I'm selling? So
definitely
start off with the right expectation, because then what happens is when you get people on these interviews, you're not just getting random people, you're getting people who are going to be a good fit for your product. And then when you do the interview, you don't mention your product at all. Like, you literally will just interview them to build a relationship. And what I suggest for people when they go through this process is to actually think about, well, what would I ask on a sales call? What would I try and understand so that I can position my product in the best way? And a lot of it starts about, where are they starting from? Where are they at right now? Where do they want to get to? What's the goal they want? And how can my product bridge that gap? So, we'll ask questions on the podcast interviews like, wow, Ruby, with everything you've achieved so far, you're crushing it in the online space. What's your biggest challenge coming up in the future? And you might say, well, actually, we're doing great, but we're trying to scale and we're really having a hard time scaling, oh, well, actually, we're just trying to get more people to buy our retreat, or we're trying to get more people to come into our high ticket coaching, or whatever it might be. And if you give me an answer like that, I know, oh, okay, that's what she's trying to do. So I want to make sure that whatever I'm selling her fits into that kind of belief of what she's going to do. But on a deeper level, you can ask these kind of sales-based questions to get a better understanding about where they're at and what they're doing. But really, I like to just go full on relationship building. I want to really build a deep connection. I want to find out about their story. I want to really come at it from a very organic view, because although it's very strategic, although it's very planned, and some people might even say, it's almost manipulative in some ways, but in my view, I don't look at sales as a negative. If you were going to look at it as something that was manipulative, it would have to be something that you were going to sell them that was for your best interest and not for their best
and not
interest.
for theirs. Yeah. And I think what is also really important to point out is Jamie's talking about like being genuinely curious. Like, it's a genuine curiosity to get to know his guests so that he has a better understanding of like, oh, okay, I actually have this thing that could really support them. And that both takes confidence in the products that you have to sell and the offers that you have. And it takes that genuine curiosity to really want to support the person that you're talking to. And I'm not sharing this just for this example of what Jamie's sharing, like for anything, for any enrollment calls, for sales calls, whatever it is, like just get curious. And that's what this is about. And at the end of the day, like, you need to get curious in order to know, how can I best serve them? How can I best support them? And if you're in a position of service and support, then it's your divine fucking responsibility to do this.
Exactly. And this is the thing that's so important, is we have to really think about, like, I don't try and make everybody buy my product. Like, if somebody comes on and I talk to them and they're not a good fit, or I don't think they're really going to get the best out of the podcast, maybe they don't have a fully flushed out product or whatever it might be, well, then I'm not going to try and sell them my stuff. Like, I only want people to come in my program who are going to be a good fit for me. They're going to be my perfect audience. They're going to be someone that I gel with, because I want to work with people that want to work with me and want to be excited. So I want someone who wants to come to me and wants to learn and wants to get all of that kind of energy. I don't want to have to sell to somebody that I have to convince of our worth.
You have to drag through the mud and be like, this is why you need to buy this.
Yeah, like, I've sold to dentists before. That freaking sucks. Like, those guys don't want what you're selling. Like, and I've been in that hardball position of trying to sell to people. So what this is about, as much as anything, is about genuinely finding out more about your target customer and finding out, like, well, do I really want to work with you? Like, what is it about you that's there? And, you know, and I don't know if you do this, Ruby, but for every interview I do, I never prepare any questions. It's always just like, what am I genuinely curious about? And I dig into their story and I find out about them as a person. Are they a person that shares my core values? Do they, you know, are they driven? Do they want to grow? Are they humble? Are they honest? You know, can they admit when they've had a mistake? Can they reach out for help? You know, those are traits that I really look for people that I really want to work with. And, you know, and that desire to, you know, really hustle and to get things done. And so that's the kind of process behind it, is that we picture who we want to get on the show and we're very intentional about it. We interview those people. And then once we get to the end of the interview, we then have a transition phase. And typically I would say that a 20 or a 30-minute interview is about perfect, because it's long enough for you to get to know them. But I would suggest to do what Ruby does with her show. Great job, by the way, which is to pre-interview these people. Because what can happen is you have more time to build up that connection with them when the microphone is off. Because when the mic's off, you get the real person. And most of the time it's going to be the same person, but you're able to find out stuff from them, which they'll maybe share with you, but they wouldn't want to share publicly with an audience. So having a 20 or a 30-minute get to know you session on the front end before they interview. I want to make sure you're a right fit for the show. I don't want to waste your time. You know, I want to get to know you more. Is great. Then you do the show, and then on the back end of that, you know, you've already got that rapport and relationship. So then it's about, oh, right, well, let's just keep talking. Like, oh man, I did not know that you did that with your business. That is so cool. Like, oh, well, yeah, thanks. Like, when did you come up with that idea? I didn't ask you on the show, but I'm just curious, you know. And you can carry on that conversation. And what I generally try and do for most people is to carry on that conversation for another 10 minutes or so. And in that end of the conversation, that's when you can start to hint about the next thing that's to come. And I'll do it in one of two ways with all of my students. You either, if it feels right, and if it feels like a good time to talk about it, you can just very lightly mention, yeah, Jerry, I don't know if you knew this, but I actually help a lot of people with their podcast. I'd love to chat to you, man, about seeing if I can help you to launch a show and get it out there. I mean, do you like that idea? Or, you know, just drop something super, super soft and super simple. And if they say yes, and they say, yeah, actually, I'm kind of curious about that. Well, great. Well, I'll tell you what, let me book something in my diary for next week. And we can go through, I'll ask you a little bit more about your business. And I think I've got a good idea, but I just want to make sure it's a good fit. And then we can talk about what we're going to do from there. And you set yourself up for that second call, which is the sales call. And you've got permission from them up front to actually pitch them, because you said, you know, is that a good idea? Do you want to know more information? And they say, yes, they give you permission to say, yeah, I want to hear about what it is that you're selling. And sometimes if you've done this right, people will just straight up ask you without you even needing to say anything. Which happens a lot. You know, at the end of the episode, they're like, Jamie, like, I actually love what you're doing, and I'm actually curious about my own podcast. We should talk. I'm like, yeah, we should. Like, let's do that, right? And we do it that way. But sometimes it's not always the right time to ask, because especially when you're new into it, especially when you haven't, you know, sowed all those seeds, because a lot of, you know, everybody thinks that the close happens at the end, but the close is happening throughout the whole process. You're, you know, preemptively, you're talking about things, you're dropping hints, you're saying things all throughout, which is getting into that mindset of like, you need to ask me about what it is that I'm going to sell you, and you sow those seeds. But a lot of the time people will get to that end of the conversation. If they haven't done it right, it's not going to feel right to straight up ask them, hey, can I sell you my product? Or can I talk to you about my product? And people don't always want to do that straight away, because it can feel like all of that good positive energy you've built up gets diminished, because they're like, oh, you were just trying to sell me something the whole time. And I'm a big person that believes that you shouldn't ever feel bad about selling. I think you should feel positive about it. But you know, what you can sometimes do is actually just pick up the conversation. Okay, thanks. That was such a great interview. Next week, I'm going to follow up with you, and I'll get on a call again, and we're going to talk about when it's going to be released. I'll give you all of the email swipe files you can send out, and I'm going to give you all the graphics. What would be a good time to follow up next week? Wednesday? Okay, cool. So you set a date in the future just to touch base with them again about some of the general stuff in the podcast.
Right.
And then what you do is on that call, you say, hey man, like I was just listening back to the recording again, and I really loved it when you said X, Y, Z. I actually had this great idea about something that we can do to help your business, to help you get to that goal. Have you got a couple of minutes so I can talk to you about it now? Great. Yeah, I do. Fantastic. Like, then you tell them your idea, get super excited. If you've positioned it right, they're going to be excited too. What do you think about that? Oh my God, Jamie, I love that idea. Fantastic. Right. And then you just say 7 magic words. Would you like some help with that? and shut up and then see what they say. So that's how we kind of position for the guests. Now, that's the first way to monetize. So actually not that complicated, but just about positioning, making sure you're attracting the right people and being very intentional with who you get out there. That on its own has allowed us to make, 5 figures from our podcast that was only getting 1,000 or 2,000 downloads a month very, very quickly, which for a lot of people is, unheard of for a low level podcast that doesn't have a lot of people listening.
Definitely.
Now, and hopefully we still got time to talk, Ruby, but now the next thing that I want to talk about is, okay, well, what happens if you don't have a B2B business? What happens if you have a product that you sell to customers? Because it's going to be super weird if you just get Karen from down the road who wants to buy your fitness product. Like, hey, Karen, want to come on my show? Like, why? Like, why do you want to interview me? That's super weird. Like, that would feel very alien. So the next way that you can monetize the show is actually by following something called the Dream 100 method. And it's by a guy called Chet Holmes. Dana Derricks does a lot about it. I have a coach called Latasha Mitchell who also does a lot about the Dream 100. And the Dream 100, as a basic principle, is you creating 100 people on a list who are people who have your audience in their network, and you want to build a connection with them and a reciprocity so that they will do a deal with you where you do a joint venture together, where they sell your product to their audience and you both profit from it. And Dream 100, the approach for that is a very long-term game. Like, you might make your Dream 100 now and it will change over time, but you might not sell to one of those people for 5 or 10 years. Russell Brunson, the guy behind ClickFunnels, had Tony Robbins on his Dream 100 and didn't get the opportunity to work with him for 7 years. But then when he did work with him, it was the KBB launch, and it was like one of the biggest launches out there. Like, that's his most recent one he'd done. And they did like $30 million or something crazy like that. But, he had the chance to work with him before then. But it's very long-term game. Like, he was doing stuff intentionally for Tony's benefit throughout that time. All the way
It's a
through.
Relationship. Again, it's the relationship. Yeah.
Exactly. And the way I always think about this is, whenever you're interacting with someone on that list, make sure you're not asking for anything and you're just providing something. A lot of people, when they speak to these people, they have a tendency to say, hey, what do I do here? Or how can I do this? Or like, how did you, get that amazing packaging, on your products? Or like, how did you do that amazing thing on stage? Don't ask them questions. Just give them value. Very, very important, because all of that crap that you're going to ask them, you can just freaking Google that. Like, you're going to be able to find that out, no problem.
Yeah, you can look on their website, just find it online.
Yeah, like,
it's there.
Ask their assistant, like whatever. Like, don't be tempted to ask them all of those questions. And one of my other favorite methods, especially if you've got a big outreach person, is to actually build influence around their circle. Who's their producer? Who's their assistant? Who's their content producer? Who's their best friend? Who's those? And go and get connected and build up reciprocity with those people, so that everybody around the person that you really want is saying, man, that Ruby, she is fantastic. Have you listened? We've all been on our podcast. We love her. So who's Ruby? Oh, you haven't heard about her? Oh, maybe I should reach out, right? And then you reach out and be like, hey, what's going on? And they already know about you, right? So
yeah, what's really crazy about that is I have this amazing nail technician in Santa Monica, and people always talk about my nails. My nails are always bomb.com. And
look good.
Thank you. And she's incredible. I mean, she's fully booked. She has no space for new clients. And her dream is to do Lady Gaga's nails. And so what she has done is she now does most of the backup dancers' nails. And she's been invited to Vegas to do the backup dancers' nails. And she's done that. And now, the backup dancers have become her clients and they rave about her. And she's done the makeup artist and she's done all these people. And so she's like, I'm literally 1 degree away from Lady Gaga's nails. But she's creating the relationship with these people. It's not like, I'm going to do their nails so that I can get what I want. It's like, no, like, she genuinely cares. She genuinely wants to serve them. And this is also serving her in achieving her dream, her number one in her Dream 100.
Super, super important, right? And I love that. And so what's really cool about podcasts is that usually how this happens is it's like, all right, well, I'll email them, or I'll like talk to them, or like I'll try and get them on the phone. But one thing that's great about a podcast, especially if you have like a top rated podcast, is that you're already giving value just by getting them on the show. Like, you're giving them a platform to speak from. You're giving them something that's super valuable. So it's very easy for you to start off that relationship on a positive by inviting these people on the show. So we have a launch formula. Typically, if we're doing JV deals, we'll say, okay, we're going to get 25 people. You'll notice a theme here: 5 hard to get people, 20 achievable people to get.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to go and reach out to those people. And those are going to be people we're going to try and get for our product launch. And typically it's done over a 90-day period when we're planning a launch. And then we'll go and get all of those people on our show and we'll build up the relationships. And a lot of them, we've been building that reciprocity over time anyway, with the view to going into it. But we'll have that campaign where we get them on the show. We talk about what they're doing. We don't mention the JV deal, exactly the same as with the guests. But then the backup is we then will send them through and say, hey, this is what I've got for you. You know, we'll send them a custom funnel or custom video, and it's going to be directly to them. Man, I was so happy you came on the podcast. There was a ton of value. I know we got a ton of exposure for you. We had like nearly 1,000 downloads on your episode. I hope you got a ton of value. I really wanted to just talk to you about something, because on the show, we got super aligned on this, this, and this. And so I wanted to ask you if you wanted to be a part of this, and then you pitched them the thing. Make it super custom. Show them how much effort you've put in. Like, I have gone out and I have made you a custom funnel. I have made you a custom video. I've written you a handwritten letter and put it on the bottom of this funnel, or I've sent it you in the mail. Like, go the extra mile. And you want to say to these people, look, this isn't one of those promotions where just anybody can promote it. Right. I've handpicked you as one of the only people that I want to promote this product. It's brand new, it's exciting, and I want you to be a part of it because I want you to profit while we're profiting it at the same time. And you go and you be that person that's like super, super like over the top. Like, you've already given them value. You're already connected with them. They already love you because you've given them that raise in status. Then you go over and over deliver. Send them a gift. Like, for anybody that I want to do a JV deal with, I'll send them a mug with a custom, not with my logo, but with their logo on it, or like a picture of their kids, or like a nice inspirational phrase. And they love it. And like, every time they drink their tea from it, like, they're like, it's a picture of them, which they love, but they remember it's from me, right? So do little things, go the extra mile that make them really see that you're thoughtful and that you really care about them. And that's super, super powerful. And then you can position them and say, because like, you only need 3 or 4 good JV partners. If it's a big person, one person to do a 6-figure launch with a product launch. And it's one of the fastest ways that you can get a ton of free traffic to your audience and to your product. And you can launch very, very powerfully. So if you have a $47 challenge product, a $297 product that's on the lower end, maybe you're not selling a higher ticket offer. And I didn't mention it actually, but I should preface it. When you sell directly to your guest, you really want to be selling a higher ticket product. It's really got to be over $1,000, because otherwise the time and energy you put into it doesn't make sense for the risk reward. You want to really be selling a high ticket product. But if you're selling a lower ticket product, then this kind of JV approach works very, very well, because you're able to get huge audiences. Some of these people that are women bloggers, they have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of women on their email list who love them and adore them and would buy anything they have. So if you go to them and you build a relationship and you're able to give them an awesome product that doesn't conflict and compete with their products, it's a complementary product, and it's something that they can profit from, you can profit from, and then their audience can get the benefit from, that's like a triple win. That's like a win-win-win straight out the gate. So that, if you've got that approach, that's a super, super great way that you can also monetize the podcast. And then all throughout this, you can still be, creating content that you want. You can be talking about things that's valuable to your audience, but making money from the podcast. And that's like our whole focus is like podcast profit, make the money first so that you can fuel the growth of your podcast and you can continue to do it long term.
Yes, I love that. Wow.
And that's all my secrets, Ruby.
All the secrets spilled on today's Thought Leader. There's nothing left. No, this was amazing. I think that this is one of the most, if not the most value-rich episodes that I have ever done. So I just want to say thank you, Jamie, for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, and for truly supporting our listeners today. Because what you offered could change the way that they podcast. And so thank you. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate the value that you brought and just the energy. And I know that our listeners definitely are going to get a lot from this episode. You'll probably want to rewind and re-listen to this, especially if you're in the car while you're listening, you're going to want to take notes. So we went through the 4 podcast identity pillars, went through 3 main ways to monetize your podcast. And in between all of that, there was a lot of other little nuggets of wisdom. So listeners, you have a lot to begin with, to start monetizing your podcast, to start your podcast. And if you want more from Jamie, if you want more Jamie, where can they stalk you online? And I will also have these links in the show notes.
Well, my address and phone number is, no, I'm just kidding. So, by the way, like I'm super open to this though, but if people do genuinely need help and they want to get connected with me, I do give out my personal phone number in my Facebook group, because for those that need it, I say to people, like, value it and don't abuse it. So I have to change my number, but I'm there for you if you need it. Right. And that's super important. So one of the best places that you can go is, you know, obviously people say, like, buy my stuff. Like, I'm super into giving free value. So I have an amazing Facebook group where we share like nuggets of wisdom like this. I've shared how to launch a show, the full strategy. There's a bunch of Facebook Lives in there. That's all in the units tab.
Amazing.
If you want to go to the Facebook group, it's called Podcasting 101. You can go to joinpodcasting101.com and you guys can jump in there. Awesome. And if you want to listen to my podcast, which is kind of where I do my rants and my talks most of the time, that's actually for entrepreneurs who want to create their mass movements. We are the Entrepreneur Junkie Movement, and you can find this on iTunes and other, you know, syndicated platforms and things like that.
Awesome. So all of those things will be in the show notes. And if you have questions for myself or for Jamie about this episode, if you have insights that you want to share with us, please do reach out to us online. You can also reach out to me on social media at I am Ruby. So listeners, thank you so much for joining me and Jamie on today's Thought Leader, where we are challenging you to rise up, speak up, and create a movement. If you dig this podcast, make sure you are downloading a few episodes and dropping a rating and review. Okay. And then you go to Jamie's podcast and you do the same. Jamie, thank you.
And make sure it's nice.
Yes. Be nice, people. Be nice. I mean, I'm assuming that if they listen this far, they dig it. They dig it.
Or you know, they sat on their phone and it got all the way through and they're like, hey, what's playing right now? Like, who's this English guy? What's going on? I'm confused. What am I doing?
Awesome. Well, Jamie, thank you so much again for just being here and sharing your wisdom. Listeners, thank you so much for being with us in this episode. And I will see you all back here on Thursday for a fresh new episode of Today's Thought Leader.